The other week, I saw this LinkedIn post where this guy was talking about a kid that had committed over 250,000 lines of code from Cursor. And I thought that post was a little silly, although I think they're telling the truth in that post that actually happened. It made me initially think, oh wow, coding is becoming less important. Because here he is making all of these commits, and it's all from a bot. But that was kind of an initial undeveloped reaction for me. I thought about coding, or at least writing code, being in decline now that these AI workflows, these agentic workflows are becoming more and more common. But if you think about it, it's not sufficient to say that coding is in decline because of that. Because even if you're using an agent to write your code, eventually at some point you or some person is going to have to make a decision. And if you want that to be a correct, informed decision, you're going to need to know how to write code. So I think what's going on here is the amount of coding is increasing because these agents are doing it now. So I think that means that coding is becoming more important, but just less immediate to us. Meaning you're not writing code all day, or at least these agentic workflow developers, they are not writing code all day, but they are assisting the agent in writing code, and they optimally, ideally, would know how to write code themselves. So this scenario where this type of workflow is becoming more prevalent, I don't think is a decline in software writing. I think it's a tilting process where the immediacy or the frequency of writing code yourself is declining, at least on like a mass scale, industry-wide scale. That part is declining, but the importance of knowing how to write code and how to understand code is increasing. So I don't think it's fair to call it a decline. It's more of like a tilting process. And I was thinking more about, how this tilting process is occurring and how can we really describe this? What can we call this process where immediacy decreases but importance increases? And that may seem contradictory to say that the importance of being able to write code is increasing, because what we immediately see, especially on social media, is people who would otherwise not know how to code are producing tools or websites or what have you with the help of AI. And this is a very visible effect of the immediacy of writing code decreasing. In order to produce these apps, you do not immediately need to know how to write code anymore. So as the immediacy declines, the accessibility will increase. But the importance of knowing how to write code also increases, because that is how you avoid 6.2 million women users getting their driver's licenses leaked. And because I'm a Zoomer slacker who reads less than I should, I wasn't able to come up with a really catchy term for this. I was just calling it tilting process. So I asked Copilot, and it came up with the phrase epistemic sedimentation, which is genius. So what that means is that knowledge has layers to it, and the layers build off of one another, kind of like real geological layers of sediment. And so if we think about this in terms of software development, we could start in like the 40s with punch cards. Really, we could start in like the 19th century with Boolean algebra. But let's just say we go from punch cards to assembly, and then we have compilers and high-level language. Then we start doing DevOps and cloud, and now we are at agentic generative workflow. And all of those layers build off of the previous layer. And relatively speaking, each time a new layer is added, things appear to get easier. Joel Spolsky, who's the founder of the arguably now defunct due to AI Stack Overflow, argued that Java was bad for studying and for teaching programmers because it was not involved enough, it was not sufficiently difficult. And he said this in 2005. He said this 20 years ago. And I've never written in a language that uses pointers, but in a sense I do think he is correct. What he argued is that if you're writing something that does not use pointers, that level of involvement deprives your brain of that level of activity. And he also acknowledged that, well, If more people can pass with Java, then more people graduate, more people go into the workforce. And what do they do once they're in the workforce? Well, if we go back to the LinkedIn post from the beginning, they just ship. So we can kind of see how the epistemic sedimentation of coding is a continuous process. It has been going on. It is not good or bad. It is just a consequence of development, like technological development. So then the question becomes, how do we deal with this? How do we acknowledge the epistemic sedimentation of coding? How do we incorporate it into our workflow? And how do we continue to understand what we're doing when we write code? I've come up with 2 ways to handle this. The first way is to go to mdr-blog.com and read the complimentary essay to this video. It is, I think, very highly developed, and it's much more involved in this video, and I go into this whole other major part that I'm not referring to now. That contains the first answer to this process. How do we deal with this process? The second answer, which is in the essay, but I'll also cover now in the video, is we have to develop a conscious workflow. When we are writing code with AI, we have to still be conscious of what we are doing. The AI is not the dangerous part. The AI does not have agency. It does not have a soul. It is not responsible in the sense that it can be guilty or punished. It is up to the human developers and managers to be conscious and aware of the process and to handle these critical problems. So now we can finally get into what I wanted to present, which are what I think are the 2 forms of conscious AI integrated workflows. Those are dependency and augmentation. Dependency is the responsible management of an agentic workflow. Ideally, what you're doing is you are treating the AI like any other software dependency in your tech stack, where if I use npm install Lodash and then I use Lodash on my website, I don't really know the full extent of the source code of Lodash, but if I try to use it and then something weird happens, I can check the source code and see what's going on and understand what's going on. So the goal of dependency workflow is to try to treat your agentic process as any other software dependency, which cannot be 100% true, because if we consider typical software dependencies like Lodash or NumPy or something, these are deterministic. They have consistent input and output, which I don't think is the case for an agent. You tell it to do something, it may not necessarily do the same thing every time. But if we are conscious of our workflow, if we understand how to write code, then I think a dependency-based agentic workflow can become analogous to any other software dependency, where you can manage unexpected behavior by knowing how to write code yourself and by clearly defining the boundaries for your agentic workflow. You, as a developer, you know what your prompt means, you know that you are prompting it correctly, and you can capture an idea of what the expected output is. And if something unexpected happens, you can look into it yourself. And now your relationship with the agentic workflow has approached something much more similar to your relationship with software dependency that you did not write. So when I call it dependency, I mean treating it like a code dependency. It has not become dependent on the AI. Now, the second type of conscious AI workflow, and the one that I've adopted, is augmentation. Under augmentation, the human is still writing probably 90, 95, even 100% of the code. And the AI's role is purely consultative. So you're asking the AI, provide me an example of this, list the pros and cons of this, so on and so forth. You are asking the AI questions. And the questions usually involve small code snippets, but you're not dumping the whole repo at the AI like you would in an agentic workflow where you have shared repo access. And if I've presented this well enough, then understand that I view both of these as good. These are both answers to the problem. how do we deal with the epistemic sedimentation of coding? The epistemic sedimentation itself is not the problem, it's how do we deal with this? These are both conscious AI workflows, and I use augmentation. I don't really have any interest right now in using dependency, but they both have their valid use case, and I think they both have their own separate sets of pros and cons, where things like small iterative change, small simple changes, are cheaper under augmentation because you just do it. But under something like dependency, well, now you're asking the agent to go through and make the small change, and at scale, that is sure to become expensive. Likewise, augmentation, if you're just asking the AI questions that you probably already know the answer to, you can just end up wasting time, especially if you're writing something very basic that you just don't need to write yourself. Again, it ties back to like what we think of as, quote, real software dependencies. You don't need to implement a string verifier yourself. You don't need to implement Lodash yourself, stuff like that. So that's pretty much my take on AI. I don't view giving a robot full access to your repo in a necessarily negative or positive way. I think it has its use case, and I hope, if anything, the takeaway from this video is that the important part is that we remain conscious of what we're doing. As things change, as new layers of knowledge build upon the technology that we're used to, we just have to keep up with the times in the sense that we are conscious of what we're doing. And so that doesn't mean we reject AI. I don't think we should do that, especially in the realm of coding. But we also shouldn't just take our hands off the wheel and let the robot do whatever it thinks it's doing. Otherwise, you get your ass turned into a T app leak. So be sure to go to mdr-blog.com for the full essay. That's my full developed take on AI. It covers more than this video did. It's involved. It's the real deal. You gotta check it out. And if you like this video, be sure to subscribe to my channel. You'll already know what the process is. Like, subscribe, comment, and thank you for watching.